Batman Arkham City, probably the most universally loved game in the coveted Arkham franchise, and it's arguably the game in the series that has the most weird, interesting, and downright confusing lore behind it. So join me as we take a trip into the underbelly of Arkham City and reveal some of the coolest, most interesting and informative details you might have missed or never knew. And if you do learn something, consider dropping a like. It does help out a ton and lets me know you enjoyed the video. I also need to give massive credit to Luis, Ranger and Mr Binks for their help with this video and in uncovering some of the lesser known facts you're about to hear. All of their links will be down below, so be sure to show them some love, and without further ado, let's get into the first fact. Tim Drake, the third Robin and the owner of the most divisive character design in the series, and this division all comes down to the fact that he is, well, bald, or at least has a shaved head. Either way, this was a huge stray away from the classic look which Tim took on in the comics, and well, basically everywhere else. A lot of people wonder why Tim took on this new, more edgy look, but in 2011, on the official Arkham City forums, senior concept artist Can Muftich actually spoke about why they went for this more hardcore and interesting design for the third man to take on the Robin mantle, and here's what he said. We wanted to create a Robin that players would identify as a contemporary character and move away from the traditional boy wonder image that most people know. Our vision of Robin is one of a troubled young individual that is calm and introverted at times, but very dangerous and aggressive if provoked. He'd go on to say, the shaved head is inspired by cage fighters, because we thought that Robin might be doing that in his spare time to keep him on his toes. Still, we kept all the classic trademarks of Robin's appearance, such as the red and yellow colours of his outfit, the cape and the mask. He's back and he means business. Now this was definitely an interesting design philosophy, being inspired by cage fighters and giving that grit and toughness to a character whose main weapon is typically his mind, especially Tim Drake, was certainly an interesting choice, and in all honesty, I think it paid off. It might be a departure from the norm, but I think it perfectly encapsulated the edginess and the faithfulness of the Arkhamverse, which we've all come to know and love from the series over the last decade and a half. Let me know what you think of Robin's design in the Arkham series. I'd be interested to know the general consensus all these years later as we move on to the next fact. We've all probably played Batman Arkham City enough times to remember the whole script off by heart. Like, if you don't believe me, you're about to find out. No, but seriously, as with all games, things are cut, changed and thrown aside for the sake of saving time, money or resources. But did you know some of Arkham City's cut lines are still available to be found in the game files? Well, we actually have a cut conversation here between Alfred and Batman regarding entrance to the Solomon Wayne courthouse.
Alfred, check the schematics for the courthouse. I need to find a route in.
If the main door is inaccessible, it appears that there is another door leading from the balcony on the front of the building. Perhaps you should try that.
Now, obviously this conversation would have been taken from the start of the game, where Batman needs to infiltrate the courthouse to rescue Catwoman, and I can kinda see why they cut this. Yeah, it would have been nice to hear Batman and Alfred converse a bit more, but if Batman had to ask Alfred for a way into the courthouse, it would A, make him seem a bit stupid. Hell, there are two front doors on the courthouse, so he'd seem a little bit clueless, and B, if Batman had to ask for a way into the courthouse, and then 20 minutes later had to ask for a way into the steel mill, it would again seem like Batman was just plain lazy. It makes sense to have him ask for a way into the steel mill, it's a whole compound guarded to the teeth, but asking twice in 20 minutes, well, I kind of get why they cut this. The second conversation they cut was also between Batman and Alfred, and would have taken place in Chapter 3 of the game's story.
Very good, sir. Shall I arrange another press conference?
I think I've had enough of press conferences.
I'm not surprised. That loathsome mayor has branded you, well, Bruce Wayne, a terrorist.
He needs to explain why his new prison is full of weapons. I'm going to investigate further. I'll be in touch.
This little conversation is so cool, and I actually wish they hadn't cut it. It gives us a nice insight into the humorous dynamic between Alfred and Bruce, and lets us into a side of the characters we don't really see much in the series. I also think it's interesting that Quincy Sharp branded Bruce Wayne a terrorist. It seems a bit overkill and was obviously a smear campaign from the former Warden of Arkham Asylum, but alas, I think this was a pretty neat conversation. The Falcones are probably the Batman universe's most iconic crime family, first appearing in Part 2 of the legendary Batman Year 1 by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. They've taken centre stage in some of the Dark Knight's best mainstream stories. Batman Begins and the Penguin series come to mind straight away, but we never really see much from them in the Arkham universe outside of Arkham Shadow, where Carmine Falcone plays a big role. I always found this a little odd, and I think a real Year 1 game would have been awesome, since we never really got the organised crime in Gotham, and we never really see it come crashing down. However, within Arkham City's stories, we do get some idea of what happened to the Falcone family's empire. The Falcones are America's oldest surviving crime family. Generation after generation has ruled the underworld with iron fists, preferring to stay away from more colourful supervillain activities. They maintain legitimate business interests, including garbage collection and shipping companies. The current head of the family, Carmine the Roman Falcone, is feared by all, and until recently had the city in his pocket, but something has changed. Quincy Sharp, the newly elected mayor, and a man who should be afraid of him, was not. Carmine's attempts to intimidate Sharp had resulted in his henchmen mysteriously disappearing, and Sharp has struck back, with the Tiger Guards closing down Falcone's operations all over the city. So from what we can gather here, whatever remained of the Falcone Empire following Batman, Commissioner Gordon and Harvey Dent's efforts between Arkham Origins and Shadow was later crushed by Quincy Sharp and Tiger, leaving them resigned to the annals of history in Gotham City. So, with the Falcones being forced out of Arkham City by Tiger, and a power vacuum opening within the mega prison's walls, a gang war kicked off. A gang war we can actually see take place in the background of our time in Arkham City. So, our main players in the gang war are Two-Face, Penguin, and the Joker. Two-Face was running with the weakest hand of the three, with his territory limited to the Solomon Wayne Courthouse and a few surrounding streets, and most of his crew were bottom of the food chain convicts trying to prove themselves. Equipment-wise, he was also struggling. Very few armed thugs, very little heavy firepower, and once he captured Catwoman, the public execution we stop in the courthouse was the former DA trying to boost his standing by killing a prominent inmate. Of course, Batman shut that down immediately, and after that pretty public humiliation, Two-Face would vanish into hiding, so deep that even his own men didn't know where he was operating from for most of Arkham City's story. Joker, on the other hand, went pretty wide with his net. His gang was easily the most unhinged, as is fitting, and it was packed with violent killers and psychopaths. He controlled massive portions of the map, including the Industrial District, Amusement Mile, and the Old Gotham Freeway, with his armed thugs stationed inside the steel mill, turning it into a fortified stronghold, while the rest of his territory relied on lookout towers and roaming patrols to keep pressure on the streets. Then there's Penguin, who had arguably the strongest overall position at the start. He had the best weapons and equipment in the city, and surprisingly his men weren't just random street punks either, they were battle tested in the gladiator pit in the museum. But instead of spreading thin like Joker, Penguin concentrated his forces in the Bowery, a smaller but densely fortified area. Penguin was probably the most heavily defended of the three, but that being said, Penguin wasn't purely defensive. He sent a squad to capture Mr Freeze from the old GCPD precinct, and they pulled it off as we see in the story. But Penguin wouldn't stop there, and he made the first major tactical move by blowing the Old Gotham Freeway after Batman escapes the GCPD, effectively trapping Joker's forces inside the Industrial District. Even after the bombing though, some of Joker's men still managed to push into Park Row, interrogating inmates for intel, especially anything related to Mr Freeze. His gang launched an incursion into Two-Face's territory, hoping to drag Harvey out of hiding. They only managed to grab a handful of thugs though for questioning, because the rest of Two-Face's crew had already made a break for the rooftops to escape. Once Batman tore through the museum, rescued Mr. Freeze, and took down Solomon Grundy and the Penguin, the power balance shifted again, with Penguin's gang becoming fractured. A large chunk of them ended up defecting, joining up with either Joker or Two-Face just to stay alive, and because of this, Two-Face's crew recovered really quickly and capitalised on Penguin's sudden absence thanks to Batman. They stormed the Bowery, occupied the now abandoned museum, and expanded their control across the prison, and at the same time, Joker's men pushed into the subway tunnels, either killing or recruiting what remained of Penguin's forces. But there was a fourth, more interesting player here. As part of his master plan, Hugo Strange was funneling high-tech weapons and equipment down into the tunnels for Joker's gang, turning them into an even bigger threat. Two-Face's crew also suddenly had access to heavier firepower, though it's never made entirely clear whether that came from Strange or if they simply raided what was left of Penguin's arsenal. Either way, the two remaining gangs were now both armed to the teeth. The gangs were tearing each other apart, the prison was destabilised, and that was the cue for Protocol 10 to be activated, thanks to City Hall clearing the plan, blaming Strange's failure in stopping the use of illegal weapons within the prison to justify the giant slaughter that was to come. So, with Joker dead and his gang in disarray before Harley takes over, with Penguin locked in his own museum and Hugo Strange out of the picture, we can confidently say, somehow, the initial weakest of the three gangs would come out the victor, with Two-Face being the last one standing, and thus winning by default. Arkham City's gang war is one of the coolest side stories in the series, and one that if you're not paying attention, you might not have even noticed was happening. Anyway, let's move on to the next fact. Arkham Asylum was obviously a smash hit, and so to follow it up, Rocksteady needed to do at least twice as well as they did in their first outing, in the Cape and Cowl. And because of this, they definitely didn't want to let the Asylum influence go to waste, because in early promotional shots for Arkham City, if we examine the suit shown in these images, we can see that initially, the Arkham City suit was actually going to have the same cowl as the Arkham Asylum suit. But what's most interesting is that the rest of the suit is clearly the Arkham City suit we're all used to, and as a little bonus, in early promo shots, we can actually see the Arkham Asylum bat signal in the sky, which is quite interesting. We can also see that the City Cowl went through a lot of changes, and in many of the early artworks for the game, the City Cowl has shorter, more curved ears. This even carries over to the Arkham City soundtrack album cover, which features these shorter, more curved ears. And yes, I have just ruined that for you, and no, you'll never be able to look at it the same way again. Also, in early promotional shots, the layout of the city was entirely different. In this image, we can see Wonder Tower behind the church, which obviously isn't how it's laid out in the final game. And in this shot, we can see an old build of Wonder Tower, and it looks a lot more stripped back and simple than the final version we see. Finally, to finish out this little pre-development segment brought to you by Mr Binks, here we have 3 shots showing early versions of the courthouse, the GCPD headquarters, and the Arkham City entrance. All 3 of these designs are really cool, and I don't think they should have been changed. They really carry that Arkham Asylum-esque feeling, and I especially love the giant scales of justice on the courthouse. That just screams Arkham Asylum to me. It's big and bold and overbearing, and all 3 of these designs really add some much missing fear factor to Arkham City. Let me know what you think of these initial designs down below as we move into the final fact. The Joker, Batman's arch-nemesis and the driving force behind nearly every single event that happens in the Arkham games. But if you're like me, you probably wondered just how the hell he ended up in Arkham City. The obvious answer would be that he was simply transferred over from Arkham Asylum following the opening of Arkham City, but as Batman will tell you, nothing is ever that easy with the Joker. Thankfully though, Arkham City has us covered, as in the 3-part story titled A Sick Plan, we hear how Mr J and Mrs Q ended up in Arkham City. After Batman stopped him from escaping Arkham Asylum, the Joker sat alone in his padded cell, knowing something was wrong. The first sign was an unusual lump on his left shoulder. He felt tainted. Weeks went by and 10 more unusual lumps appeared. The Titan had done something to him, something bad, something that wasn't funny at all. The Joker was dying. He knew it, and soon so would anyone who saw him. The last thing he needed was to appear weak before his rivals. So, one day at lunch, the Joker took a spoon and dug out another inmate's eyes, knowing this would get him into solitary confinement. He could keep out of sight, at least until his transfer to Arkham City. The Joker needed an escape plan, and on the night of his transfer, Harley Quinn provided one. Disguised as an Arkham guard, she overpowered the Joker's escort and stole her pudding away to a boat waiting on the island's quayside. As the boat carrying the twisted pair sped off towards Gotham, it was joined by a second. A secret alarm placed by Batman had alerted him to the Joker's escape, and here he was in the Batboat pursuing the fugitives. They ignored his orders to stop, so Batman opened fire. As Harley steered the boat to shore, missiles ripped the hull to pieces. They swam, the weakened Joker being pulled through the water by a distraught Harley, desperate to save her pudding. She pulled the Joker out of the water to safety, somehow avoiding Batman's searchlight. She and the Joker sat there gasping for breath when they suddenly realised where they were: Arkham City. And that's all I've got for you today. Let me know how many of these you knew and which fact was your favourite down below. Thank you for all the recent support. We just hit 20,000 subscribers, which is insane to think about, and I'm really excited to show you all this little project I'm working on, which will be really cool. Anyway, thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and goodbye.